All right, so before thinking about starting a career in user experience design, it's very important to understand what does it take really to do this job. What type of activities or tasks do you get to do as a user experience designer? That way you will know what you're getting into and you will see if this career is for you or not really. So the very first idea that I want you to focus on is the idea of user experience. When we talk about user experience, it doesn't mean that it is something that's specific to the world of apps and websites, although it is. But just so you know, user experience, it could be a learning experience. It could be service experience. It could be anything. And when we say user, it just tends to speak to the world of software and the world of apps and web development and anything that has a user interface. So user interface, UI, you will hear this acronym a lot, is actually what is specific to what user experience designers do. They design anything that other human beings will interact with, either digitally or even sometimes things that are not digital, let's say a kiosk or an ATM. So I want you to remember that this is specific to the world of websites and apps, but it can also be specific to anything that has a user interface. So first, let's think about what does it mean to develop software. In today's modern world, there are a lot of software companies, a lot of startup companies such as, those apps that now change our lives like DoorDash, Uber, Lyft, and other apps that help you, meet the love of your life, like dating apps. So if you understand how software gets built or how apps get built today, you will understand how UX designers are in that equation. What is their role in that situation? So there are a few people who get involved in the world of creating a software application, be it for desktop or for mobile. And the very first thing that you need to remember is that we have many people who are in this. So it's not just developers. So you have developers. For developers, you have front-end developers and back-end developers. You have product managers. So those who are actually, let's say, the parents of that product. So they are the people who see that products grow from becoming a baby to becoming an actual mature person. When I say product, it means a solution, a software solution. We have business analysts, so people who think about the business side of this application or software. We have program managers, so those who actually try to orchestrate that project, from the tasks to the deadlines to who does what, to keeping people in check so that they do what they're supposed to do. You have stakeholders. It's usually people who sponsor these projects. It's those who are executives or those who own the business and need people to help them build that solution that is going to involve a user interface and a user experience. Then you have project sponsors. Project sponsors are those people who usually we just need to report to or that are going to benefit financially in some way from this project. But sometimes they're also just the people who are funding this project and are actually wanting it to happen in an organization. I'm thinking about corporations here and startups in general. So a project sponsor could be a VP, Vice President of Digital Transformation, or it could actually be the CEO of a startup. You have QA engineers. They are called QA because they are quality assurance engineers. These are people who check after the application is coded and almost there to be going live. They are the people who will check on how the application is functioning. Are there any issues with it? Is it working well? Is anything that we're linking to that app, let's say databases or other aspects, are all connected and everything is working well? Is there any security issue, any security breach, any other considerations to keep in mind? So there are people who are involved in this project. Obviously, we have UX designers, and that's your interest here. These are the people who will get into thinking about the whole user experience. So anybody who's going to interact with our application or software, what are the steps or key moments that they're going to go through? What is it that they're going to experience? Where would they click? Where would they go? What do they want to see? What is better for them? What's frustrating? What's easier for them to build? We have UI designers. UI designers are a little bit more on the visual side. So sometimes the UX designer does the UI design and the thinking about the experience, but sometimes you have people who are specialized in visual design or UI design, where they think about the visual identity, the brand, the colors, the illustrations, the icons, and everything. So that's kind of a little bit of an overview of all the people who are involved in this process. Now I want you to think about the whole software development lifecycle. How do we get from an idea to an actual application or software? And obviously there is no real secret sauce here. There is no one-size-fits-all approach. The companies have their own secret sauce of building software, and they will not tell you, but there is a general overall process that is kind of common across all companies. And if you understand this process, then you will understand how is the UX designer involved in all of these steps, in all of these processes, okay? So, the first step that happens in a software development lifecycle, I will try to not go into the details of this. I will just give you the high-level view, and later on we will dive into this. But usually you start with discovery, with scoping, with research. This is not about a UX designer. This is the whole team that I just mentioned of all these people. Usually you have the business people, the BAs, the PMs, the product managers, and developers and UX designers. They are also called the four amigos in some contexts. And these four amigos are in the discovery scoping research phase. They're trying to understand what is the business goal. The UX designer here is trying to understand how can we have what is the user that we are, who is the user that we are serving. So they're researching about that person or the people they are going to serve. They're doing discovery interviews. They're seeing the scope of this project, how big and how small, what aspects of the UX design is going to be spent and invested in, and what aspects will developers actually take into consideration. So when we understand and research, we go into the second step, which is definition. This is where at the beginning we converged, and now we diverged, now we are conversion. So the second step is definition. Now, what is it really that we are going to do? Who is it really that we are solving? What is the real problem of this user group? How can we meet the business goals? And then we start thinking about user journey flows. So this is what the UX designer does along the BAs and the PMs. They think about the user journey. What are we trying to propose in terms of an experience? Who is our persona? What is it that they need? What are the touch points? How can we solve their pain points along this journey? And obviously, this is where a lot of the UX designer work happens. And then we have conceptualization or low fidelity designs. So this is where you go from, you know what's the problem, you know who you are serving, and now you start thinking about how can you create something that is an idea of your solution, of your app, but it's not totally your app. It's just going to be a concept. So we call it concept design or low fidelity design, also called lo-fi, okay? So that's where the UX designer is going to work on what we call ideation artifacts, such as storyboards or journey maps or a wireframe. A wireframe is a cheap representation of the application. It can even involve some sketching with your hands, and it can also involve a digital drawing of how you want the app to be without it being any beautiful or colorful, just about the whole concept of it. Then we have validation. So why do we do this cheap concepts? Because you want to go and validate it with the users. So this is where the UX designer Sometimes there is a user researcher involved in this process who go out there and show that sketch or concept or low fidelity design to actual people and see how is it going to fit their needs. Are there things that were missed? How can we improve this experience? So validation is very important. And then obviously when you get that feedback, you start doing iteration. So you start thinking about how can we go from this feedback to a better solution? How can I improve my concept or storyboard or low fidelity design? So you start doing some validation with actual people. We call it user walkthroughs or user validation interviews. And obviously you do that iteration. You start iterating, and you can go back and come back, and they say it's good to fail early and fail fast. So you want to get feedback as early as possible, so you don't spend so much time on something people will not want to use, right? And then we have high fidelity designs. So when you iterate and you come back to the user, so there isn't really a maximum number that you can reach for iteration. You can test something, try again, go back to people, try again, adjust it, and see what other people will think. Usually you can validate with 5, 13, 20 people for big companies. If you're doing it fast, you can do 2, 3, 5 people. But then when you are kind of know the whole flow of that experience and you have it kind of sketched out and it's in wireframe format, then you start thinking about prototyping it. So now you get it a little bit closer to reality, and then it could be even interactive. So there are some user experience tools that help you design these user interfaces. And they help you actually make them as if they are clickable. So they call it clickable prototype. So you add that logo, you make the fields in your user interface actually have text in them. So you kind of go from a low fidelity to a higher fidelity design that's even a clickable prototype. And why do you do that? Because you want to test it as well. So you go and you bring your prototype in front of other people and you see how are they going to experience. Do they click where you thought they would be clicking? Do they see the reason why you have this screen or why you have this confirmation page? Are they confused? Where are they frustrated? What things are still missing in this experience? And then you keep on iterating again. So you see, iteration is very specific. Obviously here it's a lot of the work of the designer that's happening. Business analysts can help you. Product managers, you would go back and you would demo these things to them. You would have your research results and your design decisions all documented and shared with the team so they know what you're doing and they can give you advice. Stakeholders can actually give you sometimes advice of where to go, but it's usually very hard. And this is why the UX designer needs to be very smart, because you need to think about how can I be the advocate for this end user and at the same time convince the stakeholders on my project to understand that this is the right thing. Because sometimes there is money at stake. People don't want to invest in things that you think are better from a user experience perspective, but from their perspective, it's not really good because they're going to lose money. So money in terms of time. So if developers spend so much time developing this feature, it means it's money for the company. So you have to be very smart in how you handle things, and sometimes you have to be smart in handling rejection and when people in your team discard your designs. So that's an important aspect that you need to keep in mind. Discarding your design is something that the UX designers always are in. It never goes to production, as they say. It never goes to a development situation. It sometimes is just discarded, and that's the nature of it. Especially if you are already having an application and you just redesigning parts of it. Sometimes that redesign, that feature that you're trying to add or improve is not going to be considered because they think it's just accessorial. So you have to be a very good advocate, a very good consultant. You have to develop your consultancy skills. And then obviously you have the testing. So you test your prototype, you get feedback, you iterate, you demo things, and you communicate with your team. Obviously, the prototype has some theming and branding to it. So you need to know how to work on the visual aspect of it. If there is a user interface designer with you, a UI designer, they can help you with that. But usually you, as a UX designer, you end up doing the visual thing, the visual aspect. And this is where I wanted to focus on the fact that sometimes there are actually tools that help you do this. You don't have to do it from scratch. So you have two things to keep in mind. You have design systems. They are helping you speed up your design process, so you don't have to think about how the button will look. You just have a library of components that you would reuse and design with, so you can think about the user experience and not the UI. And then there are what is called today the design tokens. So we'll cover this. Design tokens are what helps you brand and theme that experience without too much manual hassling into, and you will understand what I mean by manual hassling later. So developer handover is where you hand off your complete design. Here is one thing you need to keep in mind, is that let's say you have an application. The application will have 1,000 pages, let's say. You as a designer, you would never design 1,000 pages. You will design maybe 2% of that, maybe one flow, maybe 2 flows, 3 flows of like 10 to 15 screens. Because the work of a developer is after you give them your prototype, they will see that flow and see, okay, I can, and then obviously the business analyst has all of the requirements that the business requirements that are there. For example, I want to make a payment. I want to add this to my cart. I want to save this. I want the user to do this. All of these business requirements. You as a UX designer, maybe you'll just design just a specific experience part of that whole site. And then the developer will take that prototype that you worked on, will take what the business side is telling them, and they will start to apply this to other pages in your application. They will start to apply this to all the other sections of the experience. And this is where you have to be an advisory person, because you can't design 1,000 pages. You'll just design parts of it to show how things are working. And then with the design system and everything helping you, you will collaborate with the developer who will have what we call user stories. User stories are kind of the tasks that a developer would be doing. And they are specific to a user action or a user task, and they would develop those user stories. So they are assigned by tickets to developers and engineers. And so as they develop that application and take your prototype and designs as a reference, obviously they will develop your specific prototype and it will be end-to-end developed. But for the other pages you did not design because it's just impossible, we are not thinking about development by page. We're thinking about development by flow. There is a flow. There is a payment flow. There is a add to cart flow. There is a claim flow. There are different flows in a user experience. And so you would just focus on 2 to 3 flows, and all the other flows would just be developers extensiating based on that. They do some innovation, but not too much. And they will need your help as a UX designer to see if what they're doing is right. And sometimes you end up, if they're not sure about a section or a page or how to work on an interaction or what happens after there is an interaction, you can tell the developers to basically consider working on, you can tell them, okay, let me work on this particular page to show you. Or you can work on a microflow, design it, prototype it, and then share it with them. So you can be that advisor during the development phase. And usually there is visual QA, which is a phase that usually development software companies don't consider, which is the fact that UX designers would come into play to actually see if the developed solution is really what you designed or what you thought is the design. So you see visually the app. They give you access to a preview of it, and you can see the app and start seeing how are you going to interact. You put yourself in the shoes of the user and then see if what you designed is mapping to what they developed. And then you give feedback. So that's kind of what you get to do in a software development lifecycle. There are a lot of demos and presentations that you need to do along the way. And obviously when the application is out there, you're always involved in coming back and trying to iterate on it, trying to, improve it for a second version. See, after the application goes out, you can see the analytics of it, the data analytics, and see where people are interacting, the feedback about the app, frustrations. Sometimes there are some claims or tickets that are created. to improve the experience. So you can take all that feedback to improve the experience for V2. And this is how it works. This is how things keep going. So this is just an overall overview for you to understand a little bit the role of a designer in a software development lifecycle. Remember that you get to do a lot of documentation as well. Beyond the prototype and design that you hand off to developers, you have to put some annotations and explain a few things about the interaction. So we call it UX documentation. You can have a file within your design file to explain all these things. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what does a UX designer do in general. Obviously, it's a general view, and we'll dive deeper into all of these things in the class. Thank you so much for following along.